What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, August 26th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we only have a 6-game MLB slate tonight, but no weather issues. Or not really any significant weather issues, I should say. So it doesn't look like we're going to have to worry about that too much. There are a couple of games that I think have general rain in the area, but right now they look okay. So be sure to keep an eye on that, but should play pretty clean, I think. We do have a game in Colorado. Also, for the sake of this show, it's going to be a little unusual. We don't have a higher percentage of lineups here, partly because of Toronto and Boston having the resumed game earlier. We don't have either of those lineups yet, or at least we didn't when I built lineups for the show. So about 50%, more than 50% of the starting lineups weren't known when I built these lineups. So that's going to make things just a little bit different than usual, as far as obviously just having fewer lineups, having less of an idea of exactly what I'd be getting to. But going to go through as usual, going position by position, stack by stack, looking at what I'd be getting to if the DraftKings slate started right now, looking at what I'd be getting to for the large $5 tournament. $50K to first over there on DraftKings. As always, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you get alerts when the shows go live. Also, links in the description below for Endgame Syndicate, Brick 75's Draft Caddy, and my MLB Dub Club. Any of those are, I think, very good products. Endgame is essentially an instructional training site with myself, Utical, Brick 75, and Nerdy Tenor. We all approach DFS differently. We all have taken different paths to have some success, some more than others, obviously, with Uta being arguably the best ever. But we all have taken different approaches. Kind of no matter how you think about DFS, we probably can make you better. Brick 75's Draft Caddy, very useful this time of year for your best ball drafts. Recommend checking that out if you are still doing those, getting ready for the regular season. And then my MLB Dub Club, if the pricing on the instructional videos and access to all of us over at Endgame doesn't necessarily make sense for you, you can still get access to my MLB projections, top stacks, all of that stuff with the Dub Club. So check that stuff out. And yeah, before we get started, DC24 said, rest in peace to Sean V in chat. I assume most people have heard by now, but he passed away over the weekend, unfortunately. And it really sucks. He was a really positive person in every interaction I had with him. He was a consistent member of chat going back to my time at Stochastic, Awesemo. It was always nice to have him around. Always, obviously brought some interesting takes to chat. But yeah, really, really sad news. Really sucks. And from a broader standpoint, I think just an opportunity to say that, I think, most people creating content in the industry do genuinely appreciate you guys that show up every day and watch these shows and comment and chat and all of that. Obviously, depending on which personality you're talking about, and myself for sure, tend to have some back and forths and, kind of talk shit a little bit, but definitely appreciate you guys showing up and being here, and probably not something we say enough. So yeah, rest in peace to Sean V. That really sad news over the weekend. Really sucks to hear. DC said, might just play a lineup based on head-to-head stats just for him. Yeah, make sure you look up birthdays as well. Maybe we have, so don't want anything to go overlooked there. So yeah, that obviously just really sad news. Now to get into the slate, because I have no possible segue from that. Starting with pitching, Bailey Ober showing up 58% of the time for me. Bryce Miller showing up 57% of the time. Obviously, just going to be perfectly fine getting to either of these guys. They're both expected to be popular. Miller projected for the most ownership on the slate. Ober projected for the third most. I do think that the Ober ownership could come up a little bit. I know some sites are projecting him a little bit higher, so maybe that moves some. But Ober does have a pretty decent matchup going up against Atlanta. Not the same Atlanta lineup that they would like to have. I can't even say not the same Atlanta lineup that we've seen most of the season, because they've just been hurt for most of the season. But once again, now no Michael Harris, still no Austin Riley, obviously still no Ronald Acuna. Whit Merrifield is leading off for the Braves. Not a knock on Whit Merrifield, but this is a team that's supposed to have, Acuna and Harris and Riley, and they do still have Olsen, but Ozuna, like they're supposed to have those guys all near the top of their order. And now you have Whit Merrifield leading off. You have Jorge Soler hitting second. Not that he's bad, but certainly not having the same level of year that he has in the past. So very watered down Atlanta lineup relative to where it's supposed to be. They rank 10th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year, only a 96 WRC plus on their active roster. And Ober does have pretty solid strikeout stuff. He's in a pretty neutral park for pitching, for preventing runs. 26% K percentage this year, 3.88 xFIP. Happy to get to him. I think that the $9,200 price tag is a little bit more expensive than I would like to pay, but there's only 6 games, and it's certainly not a crazy price tag or anything like that. Stephen Leibowitz said, I think at this point you can knock Whit Merrifield. I'm pretty sure Whit Merrifield got me into like my first ever MLB live final. I'm not positive that that's correct, but I think back when he was like a rookie on Kansas City, he did something that was really big for me. I think that's what it was. So I have a hard time knocking Whit Merrifield. I still would like him to be the guy that just hits doubles and steals bases all the time. But yeah, he's not that guy anymore. Bryce Miller, 8,900 going up against Tampa. This is a Tampa team that hasn't been a great offense overall this year anyway, and then made some moves at the deadline to where they are even worse. 26% strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching on their active roster, 89 WRC plus. They're playing in Seattle, which is a great park for strikeouts, great park for not hitting home runs, just one of the best pitchers parks that there is. Bryce Miller is a good pitcher as well. Comes in with a 23.5% K percentage, 3.91 xFIP. So he is projected to be the most popular pitcher on the slate. I think that he should be, or at least should be in that conversation. I don't have any problems with that. Ryan Pepio, I'm right around the field. He's on the other side of that game in Seattle. The Mariners got Randy Arozarena from Tampa, so their lineup did get better, but this park does still suck for hitting. The Mariners as a whole do still have the highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching on their active roster this season at 27%. We know they can do damage. They have a 103 WRC plus. They do have power hitters in their lineup, but Pepio has a 26% K percentage, just shy of a 4 flat xFIP. Just a pretty good overall pitcher. But the other thing that stands out is that you are getting him $1,000 less expensive than Ober, $700 less expensive than Miller. So getting to those 3 chalky pitchers, and I'm okay with it. You can make the case that with this being like on DraftKings tonight, the $5 45,000 entry tournament or whatever, there is more merit to just like actually really knocking players for raw ownership numbers as opposed to like on slates that I think you can simulate closer to with field sizes that are closer to what you can actually simulate using, Saber Sim or whatever tools you use. I don't like to just knock raw ownership because like that all should be factored in a sim, but I do think you could make the case where, maybe the sims just aren't completely accounting for just how many lineups that means, a 47% owned Bryce Miller is in, for example. But for me, I think I'll still be getting to these guys. Ty Madden is showing up quite a bit for me, 4K flat. So I think that's one way that I am getting to these relatively expensive Ober and Miller options. Madden, only 4K. Taking on the White Sox, obviously a good matchup for him. Not anything special as far as pitching goes, but it's really just kind of punting the position, opening the door for you to get whatever bats you want to get to. If you pair him with Bailey Ober, you're only paying 13K or so at pitcher, so that's not bad. It's gonna allow you to do a lot. Madden is making his major league debut, so yeah, I mean, who knows what you're gonna get from him, but at 4K, he's really cheap. He's a good point per dollar value. And with it being a 6-game slate, the opportunity cost just isn't as high, especially this 6-game slate also. It's not like it's a 6-game slate, but you have a bunch of legitimate aces or great strikeout guys. Bailey Ober has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 26%, right there with Pepio. So it's not like, and then you have a game in Coors too. So it's not like you're sacrificing a ton at pitcher. Madden is a 24-year-old right-hander, 18 starts at AAA this year, 79 innings pitched, struck out 27.5% of hitters. Going forward, he projects for like a 20 to 22% strikeout percentage, depending on which projection model you look at. So you're not expecting him to replicate that 27.5% K percentage in the majors. But one thing to keep in mind is that is a projection, and it can be difficult to if guys make changes in the minors, not saying he did, but it can be pretty difficult to figure out and really have a good feel for what that's going to mean or do going forward until you get more of that major league data where it's more accessible. So there is a chance that he's just being underprojected. But the other thing is that, it's projecting him against major league hitters over the rest of the year. It's not projecting him if you were facing the White Sox for the rest of the year. So if you have somebody that projects for like a 20 to 21% strikeout percentage going forward, the matchup with the White Sox does still pull that up. He is fully stretched out. He is 4K. So I think from a value standpoint, he makes some sense. Edward Cabrera getting 13% ownership. Good strikeout stuff, good strikeout pitcher. Walks way too many guys. 13.3% walk percentage this year. Has also allowed 1.8 home runs per 9 innings, despite pitching his home games in a pitcher-friendly park. He has not been as good at limiting production this year as he has in the past. He does face a terrible Colorado lineup, but it is in Coors Field. So at this price tag and with his talent level on a slate that doesn't have great pitching, I don't mind getting to some of Cabrera. I think if Ty Madden weren't on this slate, you'd probably see me playing Cabrera pretty aggressively, but Madden is there for 2,200 less. And so I'm just going to end up saving salary and getting better hitters a decent chunk of the time. But we do know this Rockies lineup is really bad. Their active roster has a 90 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They rank second in strikeout percentage. And again, Cabrera is really cheap as well. So he does make some sense, even though generally rostering guys in Coors Field isn't my favorite thing to do. Then just getting the very small amounts of Barrios, Fried. You see Cooper Criswell here. He actually is not starting this game. Zach Kelly is opening for Boston. That was announced maybe 5-10 minutes before I started the show. Haven't seen confirmed if Criswell is following him or if they're just going with a bullpen game. So this is, I wasn't playing a lot of Criswell anyway. I'm not going to play Criswell now, I assume, since he's not starting. Max Fried's the one that I think is, interesting to talk about here. $8,700 price tag, getting 22% ownership. If you want to play more Fried, at the expense of some of like the Ober or Miller I'm getting to, I think it's fine. I say this about Max Fried a lot. I know I actually got to him pretty heavily in his last start, but for the most part this year, he's kind of just been in that Seth Lugo bucket for me, where especially when he is projected to be popular, I just don't get that much of him because he's not that good of a strikeout pitcher. 22.3% strikeout percentage this year. Now on this slate, that is relatively good. It's still behind Ober, Pepio, Cabrera, Miller, and Davis Martin. But it's not the same sort of drop off as on a lot of slates that he's on, but it is still relatively low for an $8,700 price tag. The matchup against Minnesota isn't the best. Usually, if you're going to Max Fried, you are just banking on him being able to prevent runs, which he is good at. You're banking on him being able to work relatively deep into games. He is generally pretty efficient. Like I said, doesn't strike out a ton of guys, doesn't walk a ton of guys, though he is walking 8.5% this year. So you're kind of banking on that. And usually when pitchers like that are pretty popular, I kind of shy away from them just because not that any pitcher is ever safe in MLB DFS, but it is just a little bit more difficult for those types of guys to make up for bad luck compared to your really good strikeout pitchers. Again, there aren't really good strikeout pitchers on the slate though, so that does make it a little bit different. But long story short, wouldn't fault anybody for playing Fried more than I am. Wouldn't even mind it if by lock I just have a little bit more Fried than I do right now. It does feel pretty aggressive to just have 1% out of 150 lineups. Could probably get the point across playing like 10 or 12%. But I think that the fact that it's Ober and Miller really getting pushed up for me and Madden does still make me okay with not getting to as much Fried. Like if you look at my projections here, you can see why it's happening. You can debate my projections. You can say you think I have Fried under projected, whatever. But if you're using these inputs, like I obviously am, it makes sense why Fried's getting squeezed out, because from a raw point standpoint, I would just clearly rather be getting to Bryce Miller, Bailey Ober, Ryan Pepio in that salary range. And then from a value standpoint, Ty Madden just looks so good at that 4K price tag, not to mention Cabrera. I've said it before that usually if I am getting a lot of a player, it's either going to be because they are the best point per dollar projection or they are the best raw point projection. If you're not one of those two things, with the exception of just being projected to be really under-owned, it's really hard for you to get pushed up really high in the number of lineups I'm playing. So that's kind of the issue, I think, with Fried and why he's getting squeezed out a little bit. But if you did have a higher projection on him, say this came in at like 17.5 instead of 15, then he's a lot more comparable to Ober. And I would be fine pulling some of this Ober back to say, 30, 35%, and then you're up closer to the field on Fried. So a lot of it does have to do with just exactly how you are projecting Fried, what you think of Fried from a DFS standpoint. But he, as usual, is just getting squeezed out a little bit for me. He's the only popular, 10+% owned pitcher that I'm not really getting to. Barrios, I'm not getting too much of at 9%. Tough matchup for him against Boston. We don't have a Boston lineup yet, or at least I haven't seen it. If we do, there is some chance. So we did get it. It is, yeah, it's a solid lineup. I was going to say there is some chance that you just get like weird shit happening in Toronto and Boston's lineups because of them having the game earlier, but Boston's running a pretty normal lineup out there. So you're not getting any sort of like, you know, B lineup to bump up Barrios. Now, looking at the stacks that I'm getting to, Detroit showing up a lot, Miami showing up a lot, the White Sox showing up a lot, the Rockies showing up. Looks like a really fun slate where I get to just play a bunch of minor league offenses and hope that one or two of them do well. But Detroit coming in at the top, and it does make sense. I mean, they have one of the highest implied run totals on the slate. They are taking on the White Sox. Now, one thing I do want to mention, and I didn't do it when I ran stuff for this show, because honestly, I just completely forgot. And that's one nice thing about doing this show is that now I will hopefully remember. Davis Martin is on the mound for the White Sox. He does not project to be a particularly good pitcher going forward. Most publicly available projection systems on Fangraphs have him between like a 4.4 and 4.9 FIP going forward. They have him as a not particularly good strikeout pitcher, like 19 to 22%, depending which one you're looking at. Zips actually just has him better than everybody else pretty much. But he did add a new pitch like 3 starts ago. He basically stole Hayden Birdsong's changeup. They discovered that Martin had very similar arm action and delivery, etc., to Birdsong, and they took his changeup grip, and he's been using it. So over his last 3 starts, 22%, 30.5%, and 24.5% changeup usage against Oakland, the Yankees, and the Giants. He had not thrown a changeup in either of his first 2 starts of the year. So that is a new pitch that has seemingly been pretty good so far. And so there is a chance that he's just getting a little bit under projected. And then obviously the other part of that is that if he's being under projected, the Tigers are being over projected. That, you know, Martin is being projected as a worse pitcher than maybe he is with this new pitch. So really long-winded way of saying, I do still think I'm going to get to a lot of Detroit. I do think they're in a good spot still, but you know, situations like this are interesting to me because I do expect Detroit will be pretty popular as well, given that they offer value. They have one of the highest implied run totals. They're probably being a little bit over projected, or at least there's some chance they're being a little bit over projected, and that Martin from this point forward is just going to turn out to be a better pitcher than he's projected to be. So something to keep in mind. I do still think they are a good value stack. I think they look good, but maybe I do get to a little bit less Detroit once I add that in. Miami in Coors Field, pretty self-explanatory. It's supposed to be Ryan Feltner going for the Rockies. So he's not the worst pitcher. I think he's one of the better pitchers that Colorado has. He's somebody I've actually played a decent amount this year, but it's still Colorado. It's still Coors Field. It's a 6-game slate. So getting to Miami is still going to look pretty good. The White Sox, it was mentioned, in chat, Power said it. He said, I want to play Ty Madden, but that 6.98 ERA in the minors screams stack the White Sox to me. Yeah, you're getting a guy coming up from AAA that doesn't project to be all that good and is going to get some ownership too at I think he was projected for 12 or 13%. I'm not, it was actually a 7.97 ERA at AAA this year, 5.29 FIP, 4.37 xFIP. The strikeout numbers were good. Like I said, the walk numbers were a little high. He gave up 1.9 home runs per 9 innings. He also it's not like he's pitching in the PCL or whatever they call that league now. He's in the International League with Detroit's AAA team, unless they moved and I'm unaware of it. So it's not even like he's out there pitching, on the moon for all of these starts. So there is a lot of upside getting the bats against him as well, both from we don't know what the hell this guy's going to look like in the major leagues standpoint, and also this guy's going to be 10 to 15% owned standpoint. So I do think the White Sox make sense going up against him as well. Colorado going up against Cabrera. Cabrera is getting some ownership. And like I said, he's a good strikeout pitcher. He has an abundance of talent in his arm, but he has given up power this year. He does put too many guys on base. He does walk guys. And you could just get into a pretty ugly bullpen game here too, between Miami and Colorado potentially. So, if Cabrera is just really inefficient, you get into the front end of Miami's bullpen early. So Colorado, goes without saying, has a lot of upside at home as well. San Diego, kind of the 5th stack for me here, where you have Detroit and Miami in kind of their tier at the top, the White Sox, the Rockies, and then the Padres. Padres facing Kyle Gibson in St. Louis. Obviously, a lot of power upside here. The Padres don't strike out a lot. They put the ball in play. They have power in their lineup. All of that is good. Kyle Gibson doesn't miss a ton of bats. 146 expected ISO allowed to righties this year. 195 to lefties. He is a veteran pitcher, generally decent at limiting production, but don't mind taking my chances on the Padres here. High implied run total as well. Then you get a little bit of a drop off to like St. Louis, Boston, Tampa, pretty much everybody else. And then Minnesota coming in down at the bottom against Fried. That is, in a lot of situations, I wouldn't really like that since I'm taking such a big stand, at least right now, against Fried. I would like to be getting to Minnesota if I'm just not going to play him. And I do still think, that's the case to some extent, where I ideally would have more Minnesota and kind of just be setting up my group of lineups to like really capitalize if Fried doesn't have a good game. But one reason that I don't mind it as much here is that Fried can just go out there and kind of do his thing and still not be somebody that you have to have, since he isn't as good a strikeout pitcher as Ober or Pepio or Miller. You could just get at 8,700. It's not like Fried is really underpriced for the matchup. So you could just get Fried having like a, game where he gets 15, 16, 17 DraftKings points and he's not useful. So I don't mind kind of just not having either side of that game as much, given that I think, he's pretty much correctly priced. I'm not getting away from him because I think he's bad or anything like that. I'm just getting away from him because I think that there's more strikeouts to be had elsewhere. Looking at the 5-man stacks, Detroit again at the top. Again, maybe comes down a little bit once I remember to adjust my projections on them slightly. I don't want to get too carried away, though. It's not like I'm now going to change Davis Martin's projections to like, him being a top tier pitcher or anything. But either way, Detroit's going to look really good. San Diego, Miami, the White Sox, pretty balanced on these mid-range teams with the exception of Detroit, who probably will come down, which will push this other stuff up a little bit. Now moving to position by position, I assume, it's going to be a lot of Tigers at the top. Nuke said, am I aware of any ownership? I've been mentioning it the whole show. It's on the screen. I don't really know what you're asking. Yeah, like the screen here is the ownership projections that I used to run all of this. So at the top, at catcher, Cal Raleigh leading the way, 23% exposure for me. That is an interesting one because I wasn't getting to a lot of Seattle stacks overall, but you are getting one of the, actually on this slate, probably the best power hitting catcher, one of the best power hitting catchers in baseball, and probably the best power hitting catcher on this slate. Very fair price tag at 4,200, taking on Pepio. So you're going up against a popular pitcher. If Raleigh, hits a home run or two off Pepio, obviously it hurts the people that have Pepio. And he is priced to play in this park. It's where he plays his home games. So yeah, the park sucks for home runs, but it's not as much of an issue for somebody like him because his overall numbers for the season drive his price and naturally factor in the park that he's playing in. It's not like when you take an opposing player who plays in a good park, is typically priced up, and then you throw them into T-Mobile Park and they're kind of automatically overpriced. He's just sort of automatically priced correctly at home. And then when you get him on the road, obviously he's underpriced. So looks really good here. Jake Rogers showing up 19% of the time, obviously for Detroit. I'm getting to them a lot. Jake Rogers does have some power. He's cheap. Mostly it's just that he's correlating with my Tiger stacks. So catcher in general is a position where I am looking to correlate more just because of, you think about correlation basically to try and like put it in a way that makes sense. Not like most of these catchers aren't going to project well. You can see over here that they're all projected 5 to 7% or 5 to 7 fantasy points on DraftKings. But with correlation, basically what you're saying when somebody says that they correlate with their lineup is that if you have a, let's say 5-man, in this case, Tiger stack, and your other 4 Tigers do well, if you knew going into the slate that those other 4 Tigers did well, Jake Rogers' projection, instead of being 6.4, might be like 8.4. And so when you have a position like catcher, where for the most part, everybody sucks, even Cal Raleigh, he doesn't suck at baseball, but the matchup against Pepio in T-Mobile Park absolutely sucks. So when you have a position like this where there's nothing that really stands out as a good hitter in a good matchup in a good park, a lot of times what I get to is just more heavily than usual even going to be driven by what lineups you're playing overall. Kind of like if you think about it from a hand building standpoint, your last piece in, you're kind of just leaving catcher blank and then saying, okay, I have 4 Tigers in this lineup. Jake Rogers makes sense, or I have 4 White Sox, Corey Lee makes sense. Raleigh's a little bit of an exception because he does hit for so much power. He does give you upside there. But, for a lot of it, you're going to see, Rogers showing up in Detroit lineups, Lee showing up in White Sox stacks, Stallings showing up in Colorado stacks, revenge game against Miami. Shout out Sean V. Herrera showing up probably in St. Louis stacks. So for the most part, that's kind of how it's going to go. Alejandro Kirk, one of the better hitting options on the slate, and he's cheap. I saw Power mention that he's getting to him. Probably a function of me not getting to a lot of Toronto here, at least when I ran everything. Now, remember, I did run this with Criswell starting. He is expected to be the bulk reliever now, so it's a slightly worse matchup probably for Toronto. Like, you're still getting Criswell, you're just getting one inning of somebody other than Criswell. But if I were to, for whatever reason, get to more Toronto, Kirk would come up. It's not like an anti-Kirk take here. It's more he's projected for 17% ownership, and he projects basically the same as everybody else does. So, and I'm not really getting to a lot of Toronto overall, so he kind of just gets pushed down. So I don't mind the way my catcher exposure looks. I think it makes sense. Rogers getting ownership, but I'm getting to the Tigers, so that doesn't matter to me as much. Getting over the field on Raleigh, getting over the field on Lee, about even with the field on Stallings, a little bit under on Herrera. Again, wasn't getting to a lot of Cardinal stacks either. Moving over to first base, Jake Burger, very, very, very flat at first base, which is interesting. $5,600 Jake Burger, leading the way for me at 12%, but basically getting to half the field. And I think that's fine. Like Burger, if you're going to Miami, Burger obviously is somebody you would like to get to. He is one of the best power bats on the Marlins. Somebody mentioned a minute ago that Xavier Edwards is on the injured list as well. That is one guy that usually when you're stacking Miami, you like to get to. Not an option today. Feltner's held righties to a 159 expected ISO this year, 21% K percentage, not a horrible pitcher like I was saying. And the price has adjusted on Burger for Coors Field. It's not like you're getting Jake Burger priced to face Feltner in Miami, but the game's in Coors Field because DraftKings was asleep. He's 5,600 and still projected for 22, 23% ownership. So, I think he's like the best first base play, but still not to the same extent that the field is projected to be getting to him. Jake Cronenworth batting third from the left side against Gibson. I mentioned that he has given up significantly more power to lefties than righties this year, so that looks pretty good. And then, saving some of that ownership on Burger does let you get over the field on Andrew Vaughn. I'm around 2x. I'm around the field on Torkelson. I am around the field a little bit over on Mike Toglia, batting fifth. He also is pretty expensive here, but does have some power upside against Cabrera. A little under the field on Jonah Bride and Arise. A little over the field on Brandon Lau. So kind of interesting, weird first base exposures for me. Vlad getting a bunch of ownership. Again, it just looks like I'm going to be under the field on Toronto. It's a good spot from a park standpoint, playing in Fenway, but it is a pretty tough matchup, getting the quasi bullpen game. And mostly it's just that they're getting a bunch of ownership. And I don't think that they, from a range of outcome standpoint or a projection standpoint, are all that much different from other teams that you can get to. And they're also more expensive. So I think that's kind of why they're just not showing up for me quite as much. At second base, again, pretty flat, but getting to a little bit more. Otto Lopez. He is quite a bit cheaper than Burger. Obviously not the same level of power hitter, but he does give you some stolen base upside. Ryan Feltner is bad, if I remember correctly. I'm double checking it, but extremely bad at preventing stolen bases. So again, this isn't to say I don't think Jake Burger is a good play in a vacuum or anything like that, but Otto Lopez's skill set actually I think is a little bit more appealing against Feltner than somebody like Jake Burger's. I don't know if I worded that correctly because, again, obviously I still like having a power hitter a good power hitter in Coors Field, but when you're talking about or thinking about what Ryan Feltner actually struggles with, he's not that bad at getting right-handed hitters out. He is extremely bad at preventing guys from stealing bases if they get on, and Otto Lopez will do that at a much cheaper price tag. I do like getting there. I like the stolen base matchup against Feltner. Again, another reason it sucks that Edwards is on the injured list. Brendan Rodgers on the other side of that game, looking pretty good. Connor Norby getting 22% ownership. I'm at like 11%. He is a good play. He's only 3,700 second base, third base eligible. He's been hitting well since coming back up to Miami. He was a highly ranked prospect in the O system. They traded him for Trevor Rogers at the deadline for unknown reasons. But he's somebody that I do think looks good here. I like the multi-position eligibility as well. I'll look quickly, but I'm getting to him at 6% at third base. I'm also getting the Burger more at third base. So I'm actually not half the field on Burger. I forgot he had MPE. I'm basically I'm a little under the field on Norby, like 16, 17% total. And then I guess I have 30% Burger, Fields at 22. So I'm actually not under the field. Everything I said still applies where he is priced up. But I guess with how much time Madden I'm using, that probably doesn't matter too much. It's just not that difficult to get to his salary. So you could make, from like a thinking about slate standpoint, the fact that he is priced up already and all of that is a potential reason why you do end up not getting to popular players. It's just actually not the case for me with Burger on this slate because I forgot to include third base exposure. Norby, again, a little under the field when you include both, but good price tag, very good price tag. Projects to be an average to above average major league hitter going forward. Nothing, no real concerns there. He looks good. So happy to get to him. Colt Keith, getting right around the field, going up against Martin. I do like that, at least so far, I'm not taking crazy stands on the Tigers. It's more so that I'm just like getting to them around the field. Christopher Morel, second base. Field's not getting there at all. I have some. Does negatively correlate with Miller. It's not a good matchup. It's not a good park. But you're seeing it with Morel. You're seeing it with Brandon Lau. These are second base options that do have power upside on a slate where there's not a ton of offenses that you are going to love. And the ones that do look the best for the most part are pretty popular. When you have a Coors Field game, but it involves the Rockies and the Marlins, that kind of just makes it so a lot of offenses are going to look pretty similar because offenses that are outside of Coors but have more power have just as much upside as the team in Coors. And then you also consider that like the Tigers have one of the highest implied run totals. A lot of their run production isn't necessarily going to come via home run because they don't hit a ton of homers. So it just creates a situation where the popular plays aren't necessarily great players. And you can kind of roll the dice on guys like Brandon Lau, Christopher Morel, because they do have power upside. So interesting, that I'm getting over the field on them. I don't mind it given the negative correlation. Max Video say, can we still use your picks for FanDuel? I mean, like, this isn't a picks video. I'm just going through the plays that I'd be making on DraftKings. So the way that I would answer that is basically anything that I'm saying about a player's matchup, talent, skill level, whatever, is usable no matter where you're playing because it's describing the player, their matchup, how they look. Anything about exposures, salaries, ownership is going to be different on FanDuel because obviously it just is. So I wouldn't say, oh, I'm playing a ton of Bryce Miller on DraftKings, or like I wouldn't say, oh, I'm playing a ton of Time Madden on DraftKings, so I should play a lot of Time Madden on FanDuel. Like, I actually feel pretty comfortable saying you absolutely should not without having even looking at the FanDuel slate. But if it's just, Bryce Miller is in a good strikeout matchup in a good park, that is true no matter where you're playing. So it really depends on exactly what you're looking for, what you mean. Yeah, because trying to extrapolate exposures and everything to a different site with different pricing isn't going to work very well. Pretty flat, the rest of my second baseman. The field is expected to get to Norby the most, followed by Lopez. None of that surprising, followed by Keith. I'm not getting to David Hamilton. I'm not getting to Vidal Brujan. Those are both surprising to me that I don't have any. They are both hitting toward the bottom of the order. David Hamilton is pretty expensive for a hitter at the bottom of the order. It's not like a matchup with Jose Barrios is a great matchup either. He has been worse this year than I think any year in his career. 19% strikeout percentage, 4.43 xFIP. But if you call him like an average pitcher, I'm still not really in a hurry to pay nearly $5K for David Hamilton. Maybe that ownership projection comes down since we do have him confirmed batting ninth now. Vidal Brujan also, he is affordably priced. Maybe I have him in the outfield a little bit. I don't have him any at second base. He is batting eighth, so not your best lineup spot. But if I'm playing 150 lineups and I'm stacking the Marlins as much as I am, ideally I would actually be getting some Brujan in there. It's kind of a weird stand to just be like, I'm going to play zero of this guy. So I don't know. Maybe that is something that changes. Maybe there was just like something fluky in the initial run that I did before the show. But I will say I don't like that I don't have any here. And maybe I just have him in the outfield and it's a moot point. Everybody else projected for 10% or less ownership for the field. At third base, this is where Jake Berger is being used for me more. I am paying up at third base. So this slate is like the polar opposite of one of the slates the other day where I was just like jamming in, I think like Jace Young and other basically minimum salary guys. Ken said speaks to the quality at shortstop. Yeah, you don't have Gunnar Henderson on this slate. I don't even know if he was referring to third base because that would have been a really, really quick comment. But I think the shortstop component does have to do with why I'm able to pay for Berger, Machado, Devers, McMahon at third base. You don't have Bobby Witt on the slate. You don't have Gunnar Henderson on the slate. You do not have CJ Abrams on this slate. You do not have Ellie De La Cruz on this slate. I feel like I'm forgetting one other. Oh, you don't have Mookie Betts on this slate. You don't have Corey Seager on the slate. So all of those shortstops that usually you're allocating salary for because they're just collectively like all the best hitters in baseball outside of like Aaron Judge and Soto and Ohtani, they don't exist here. So I haven't looked at shortstop yet. I assume I am saving a little bit of salary there, but it allows you to pay for Jake Berger, Manny Machado, Rafael Devers. I'm still getting to Jace Young, who is cheap and correlates with my Tiger stacks, Ryan McMahon, Nolan Arenado. So pretty self-explanatory why you'd want to get to those guys. I do like that I'm around 2x the field on Machado. Again, the matchup with Gibson isn't the best. Gibson does struggle with lefties more than righties, but Machado is good. Rafael Devers, again, Barrios is having a career worst year. He's allowed 1.5 home runs per 9. Devers is really, really good. He's in Fenway. All of that looks good. Ryan McMahon in Colorado, good hitter. Decent matchup against Cabrera. So very, very happy with how third base looks here. Royce Lewis, another one I'm paying up for a bit. Getting to him some against Fried. Tough matchup, but really, really good hitter. So clearly happy to be getting around the field, if not a little bit over the field on him. Fried is really good at preventing stolen bases. I knew he was one or the other, but he is good at preventing stolen bases. So that is another negative to actually going to a lot of Minnesota guys. But Royce Lewis looks fine. Somebody had said, what about Vlad with the multi-position eligibility? I only have him 3% at third base. I think it was like 3, 4, 5%, something like that at first base. So he's projected for 15% ownership. I'm expecting to be around like half the field on him total. Again, it's just, I think, a Blue Jays thing overall. They're projected for ownership. It is a good park. It's not a great matchup. And they're relatively expensive, Guerrero specifically. So there's just other spots that I'm prioritizing that I'm getting to. I'm prioritizing getting to the Tigers at similar ownership because they are just a lot cheaper. They have the higher implied run total. So that is all, it's kind of, usually you'll see me get to like one or two popular teams, but not all of them. And the Blue Jays are definitely one that seems to be getting squeezed out. Peyton said, opinion on Mickey Gasper, 2K, Red Sox catcher. I was actually going back to look. I'm not sure that I had him projected in. So he is somebody that if I didn't, so I didn't have him projected in when I ran stuff. He does add more value. That's a really good question. Does add more value to the Red Sox. So for one, he's just obviously a good value option at catcher. He is playing second base for the Red Sox, but on DraftKings, he is a catcher. So you have Connor Wong and you have Gasper, both catchers in the lineup for the Red Sox. It's going to make stacking, it's going to make Gasper individually a good value. He projects as a good hitter. He's got a decent matchup. He is toward the bottom of the order, but you're paying minimum salary for him as opposed to like maximum for David Hamilton. So he individually is just going to be a good value that is going to cut into some of the other catcher plays I was making. But also it's going to make stacking the Red Sox a little bit easier just because you have a 2K guy you can use now. The Red Sox are expensive. Duran's $5,900. Casas is $5K. Devers is $5,800. O'Neill's $5,400. Wong, Yoshida, and Abreu are all $4K or higher. David Hamilton, I already mentioned, is nearly $5K. So having the ability to get to a 2K Gasper does make those stacks a little bit easier to get to and still have good pitching or good one-offs around them. So not only do I think I'll probably get to him a decent amount because of the price, I also think it does have the potential to make me actually get to Red Sox stacks a little bit more than I have on this show. It's kind of twofold there. But yeah, that's why I didn't mention him at catcher. I didn't have that lineup when I started everything. Moving on to shortstop, where, we're paying down at shortstop. Trey Sweeney showing up 25% of the time for me. Fields at 17%. Just another popular value play. Okay matchup against Davis Martin. Already talked about him when I was talking about pitching, or stacks rather. My slight concerns, but Sweeney is a good point per dollar value. Nicky Lopez, good point per dollar value. Taylor Walls sucks, but he'll steal bases. Decent point per dollar value. Mason Wynn's the only shortstop I'm getting to that is remotely expensive at all. 4,300 in St. Louis. I'm getting 21%. Field's at 19%. So pretty much in line with the field on that one. Good spot in the order. Reasonable price tag. The Cards have a pretty high implied run total against Randy Vasquez, who is not a particularly good pitcher so far this season. Only a 166 expected ISO allowed to righties for Vasquez with a 20% strikeout percentage, 211 expected ISO allowed to lefties with about a 9% strikeout percentage. Certainly prefer left-handed bats, but I'm not getting to a ton of Cardinal stacks overall, and their left-handed bats do play positions that you have more options. Also, I haven't gotten to the outfield where, like Burleson and Nootbaar and I think Donovan can be played. Victor Scott as well. So might just have more Cardinals in the outfield as well, but certainly getting to Mason Wynn a good amount. Pretty ugly position. I think the field's handling it mostly the same way as me. 14% projected ownership to Ceddanne Rafaela, who is not in the lineup. So some of that ownership probably ends up like transitioning to like Gasper at catcher. But yeah, he was in the projected lineup, not the actual lineup, but I wasn't getting there. Ernie Clement we don't have a Blue Jays lineup yet. He's projected to be getting some ownership here, but again, I'm just not getting to a lot of Toronto, so I'm not really surprised that I'm not there. But the field mostly handling it the same way as me, saving money, going to Mason Wynn at 4,300, or saving money with Sweeney or some other cheap catchers. Now moving to the outfield, where hopefully I'm getting to some of these Cardinals, but it doesn't look like I am. Jesus Sanchez leading the way at 28%. Fields there. Riley Green is not in. Somebody said Riley Green's not in the Detroit lineup. Yeah, just refreshed it. No Riley Green. So that will impact not only how much Riley Green I'm playing, but also it does make Detroit look a bit worse. You do still have good outfield options decent outfield options that you can rotate in, though. Parker Meadows is leading off. Kerry Carpenter is hitting second at pretty cheap price tags. So I don't mind getting to either one. Oh, Power said he mentioned. Okay, so we got Springer, Loperfido, Guerrero, Kirk, Barger, Clement, Schneider, Jimenez, Baroa. So I don't think I've talked about anybody yet that isn't in that lineup. I know mostly talked about Kirk, Guerrero, and then just now mentioned Clement. They're all in there. Loperfido hitting second is going to be a pretty good value. Barger hitting fifth as well. So, I don't know. Those guys, I'll be kind of interested when I rerun with Toronto's lineup, just because you have both of those guys in the top five. That does just make it easier to afford Guerrero. It also could potentially drive up the ownership on those stacks. So kind of a trade-off there. No Dalton Varsho. Loperfido hitting in his spot. No Will Wagner, who was cheap and somebody that people would play. So, I'm interested. Maybe that moves the needle for me a little bit on Toronto, but I still don't love the matchup the way that Boston's rolling guys out there. I do obviously love the park. So no Riley Green. I am getting to Jarren Duran. Happy about that. Barrios, again, not somebody that I mind taking hitters against, especially when they're really good. Duran not only gives you power upside, but he does steal bases as well. Barrios has been slightly above average at preventing stolen bases over the last couple of years, but not by a margin that makes me overly concerned about somebody like Duran. Luis Robert, if you're getting to the White Sox, you may as well be getting the Robert. Again, negatively correlates with Ty Madden making his major league debut. Matt Vierling was showing up 20% for me. He is batting third. That's another, solid outfielder that you can move some of that Riley Green to. Again, I like the matchup here against Martin. Like, I think he's probably an average-ish pitcher. Again, I think he's probably going a little bit over projected, but I still think it's a pretty good spot, especially when you factor in the salaries, and Vierling is only 3,800. Left-handed bat for the Padres and Jurickson Profar going up against Gibson. I like that one. Brenton Doyle in Coors at 6K. Like, holy shit, that is a hell of a price tag for Brenton Doyle. But you have a 4K pitcher that you can use. You have solid, 8 to 9K basically mid-range of pitchers that you can use. You have all of these cheap bats on Detroit that you can use to get to Doyle. You have cheap White Sox bats you can use to get to Doyle. It's not going to be that tough to get to Brenton Doyle. And the upside is certainly there, both offensively and from a stolen base standpoint. Parker Meadows showing up for me, which is not surprising. He looks good. Edward Cabrera also not good at controlling the running game. So another point in favor of Brenton Doyle. Also, a very small thing to note, but the fact he's leading off, if he gets on, obviously this only applies to his first at bat, but if he gets on in that at bat, clearly there's nobody in front of him. Cabrera walks a lot of guys. So sets up as a good stolen base spot for Brenton Doyle. Parker Meadows, Kerry Carpenter, like both of those guys. Ozuna, negative correlation with Ober. So I'm not getting to a lot of Atlanta stacks. I think somebody had asked me about stacking them earlier. I'm getting, I'm over the field on Ober, so that is going to drive down generally how much I'm getting to Atlanta. Not always. I'm over the field on Madden and over the field on the White Sox. But Ober has a lot of 182 expected ISO to righties this year. You do only have 6% ownership coming into Ozuna. He makes sense, I think, as part of like a mini stack, as a one-off. I'm actually going to take a look because I'm curious to see what Ozuna lineups look like. So here we have a 5-man Miami stack, a 2-man Braves with Ozuna and d'Arnaud. So you're not fully committing to the Braves blowing up Bailey Ober, but you're saying, okay, look, in this lineup, I'm playing Bryce Miller, I'm playing Cabrera. May as well try and, especially on only a 6-game slate, try and negatively correlate a little bit with a 30% owned Ober. Take a couple right-handed power bats. Hopefully they do some damage against him. Here we have him again with d'Arnaud in a Tiger stack, same kind of thing, playing Miller and Madden in that one. Pepio, Cabrera, we have a Miami, and so it's a 4-man Miami, 2-man Detroit. Ozuna one-off and Lewis one-off. So that one's interesting too. You have the one-off not only against Ober that has significant power upside, but you have the big-time power hitter in Lewis against Max Fried as well, who is popular. So I like the way that lineup is constructed, even though it is only a 4-2, which isn't ideal. Bridgeline said Ty Madden popping on FanDuel. In that case, I take back what I said about assuming he was a terrible play there. I figured with one pitcher that he would be a DraftKings only guy. But again, haven't even looked at FanDuel. So if he's showing up in whatever your process is there, definitely do not take my word for it that he's not a good play. Same thing here. Toronto 5-man, Ozuna one-off, and then San Diego 2-man. Obviously, this is going to change because Wagner's not playing, but you get the point. Ozuna is a interesting, useful way that you can get negative correlation with Ober without having a lot of lineups that you're committing to this, relatively weak offense in a park that doesn't give up a ton of power. But you're getting a guy individually that does have a ton of power. Like the Braves stack sucks, but isn't very good because it's missing Harris, it's missing Ozuna, or it's missing Acuna rather. It's missing Riley, but Ozuna is still Ozuna and still has power. So I do like the way that I'm utilizing him. He's in 12% of lineups, projected for 6% ownership. Alec Burleson, only 9% ownership. I'm getting to about 11%. So I do like that. Good matchup against Vasquez, just not a good pitcher. Getting to some Jackson Merrill, another left-handed power bat going up against Gibson. 5 to 10% ownership on, these other guys. Negative correlation against Pepio for Rodriguez. Negative correlation and a pretty good value against Madden for Benintendi. Jake Cave batting second in Coors. The dude sucks, but he's getting 8% ownership batting second in Coors Field. I don't mind having some of him. Newt Bar from the left side batting cleanup at only 3,500 against Vasquez. A little under the field, but pretty close. Kyle Stowers, 3,300. I'm kind of surprised he's only projected for 9% ownership. I'm getting to 8%. So on the one hand, I guess I get it because that's exactly how much I'm playing, but he's been terrible since going to Miami in the trade from Baltimore. This is somebody that is expected to be a major league level hitter, and he's $3,300 in Coors Field. Was projected to bat 6th. I guess I could look at their actual line. He is batting 6th at 3,300. So a little surprised he doesn't have more ownership there. But at the same time, outfield is loaded. You can only play him in the outfield. I guess if I had to start telling you what outfielders I want to give back to start playing more Kyle Stowers, it would be kind of tough for me, to do that because I do like the outfielders I'm getting to. But obviously a good value play if you can get to them. Randy Rosarena, same kind of thing as Rodriguez and Raleigh. He is a good hitter. He does have power upside in lineups where you don't have Miller. Go ahead, take a shot on Rodriguez, Raleigh, Rosarena. You don't have to commit a ton of entry fees to them, but in some specific lineups, they will make sense. As far as who the field is getting to, and I am not getting to Sanchez, Green's irrelevant, Vierling, Duran, getting to them. Rafaela wasn't getting to him, but he's also not playing. Meadows, Doyle, Carpenter, Robert. So I'm pretty much, I like the same guys as the field. They're not projected for crazy ownership or anything. Aiden said, can you give me the offense that will be low owned and way overperform expectations to help me win a tournament? No, if I could do that, I probably wouldn't be doing this show. I would just be keeping my crystal ball to myself and making a lot of money. Bridgeline said, can I leave 1K on the table on FanDuel? Again, like I can't answer this specific to the FanDuel slate tonight. My general thought in MLB DFS is that it's fine as long as your lineup makes sense. Like if you have a 4-4 stack on FanDuel and you have Bryce Miller, who just, obviously a good pitcher, I wouldn't go out of your way to change one of your stacked hitters to an unstacked one-off. You could do that. It would be perfectly fine. But there's just going to be a lot of cases where like you have, I don't know, let's just say a 4-man Detroit stack, a 4-man Boston stack, all 4 guys from both teams are hitters that, you're happy with. You have Bryce Miller. A lot of times you're going to be in a situation where like you could turn Matt Vierling into an outfielder that's $1,000 more expensive from a different team, but you're only gaining like 1 point in projection. And when you factor in the correlation, it's probably a negative. So in baseball, because there is so much variance, so much volatility, leaving 1K is fine. Just make sure that your lineup makes sense. Make sure that there's not like an obvious upgrade that you can get to. So I'm not saying that you should just like leave 1K on the table to be different or anything. I don't think that's generally a good strategy in MLB, but I don't worry about, as long as my lineup makes sense, I don't worry about 1K. Whereas like in NBA, you can pretty much always upgrade your lineup if you're leaving 1K on the table outside of like, weird end of the season April slates. Because it's just more projectable. There's less variance. Correlation doesn't play as big a role, all of that. So, I think as long as the lineup makes sense, it's perfectly fine. So to quickly recap what I'm getting to on DraftKings right now: Detroit, Miami at the top, White Sox, Colorado, San Diego, the second tier, St. Louis, Boston, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, Seattle, the third tier, and then kind of a drop off to Toronto and Minnesota. Toronto's getting ownership. So I think they are mostly kind of an ownership trade for me. They are in Fenway Park, which is nice. Don't love the matchup with the modified bullpen game. The caveat with Toronto is also, though, that I did not have that lineup. Also, that's a caveat with Detroit. Did not have that lineup, and Riley Green is not in, so it makes them cheaper, but also not as good. Also, I mentioned it at the top, but I did forget to slightly adjust for Davis Martin having a new pitch, potentially being a little bit better than projections are giving him credit for. Don't want to go out. I'm not going to, go too crazy and say that Detroit is like a bad play or Davis Martin's a great play or anything, but he probably is a little bit better than he's getting credit for. Pitching wise, I was pretty aggressively playing Bryce Miller, Bailey Ober, and Ryan Pepio. As of right now, I was taking a massive fade on Max Fried. Was pretty aggressively playing 4K flat Ty Madden. So those were the 4 guys I was getting to the most: Ober, Miller, Pepio, and Madden. And then it was a drop off to everybody else. Gonna quickly just scroll back through chat, make sure I didn't miss anything. So if you have any last second questions, get those in. Not sure if Zach Kelly's Joe Kelly's brother. Actually, I have absolutely no idea. Looks like that's all the questions. So thanks for checking out the show. Appreciate it as always. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up on the way out the door. And we'll be back here with the same show for tomorrow's slate. Good luck on your lineups tonight.